Could one captured enemy fighter prove to an entire empire that their war was already lost? This is the story of that shocking discovery. October 1944, Clark Air Base, Philippines. Engineer Lieutenant Teishi Yamamoto, usually unflappable, stood transfixed in the maintenance hangar. His gaze locked on the monstrous marvel before him. Under the glare of industrial lamps, its massive radial engine lay exposed, thick oil still wept from fresh bullet holes in its fuselage. This was no ordinary wreck. A P-47 Thunderbolt, brought down by engine failure, had crash-landed virtually intact in a rice paddy just 3 kilometers from the base. "It's enormous," Corporal Kenji Tanaka, Teishi's junior engineer, breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "Twice the size of R-0. Teishi circled the aircraft slowly, his trained eye dissecting every detail, each observation tightening a knot of unwelcome understanding in his gut. The sheer quality of its construction, the formidable thickness of its armor plating, and above all, the immense Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine, pumping out over 2,000 horsepower. Japan's premier fighters could scarcely muster half that. Colonel Saito demands a full technical analysis, Teishi stated quietly. He believes understanding American aircraft will guide us in building superior interceptors. A heavy silence fell before he added, "Can we build something like this?" Teishi knelt beside the engine, his fingers tracing the impossibly precise machined parts, a level of tolerance Japan's factories, even in peacetime, couldn't hope to achieve. Now, with resources dwindling and factories under constant bombardment, such precision engineering was a cruel fantasy. "No," he finally conceded, his voice barely audible. "We cannot build this. We never could." Major Ishida strode into the hangar, his boots echoing sharply on the concrete floor. Behind him, 2 guards escorted the American pilot, a young man perhaps 25, with a bandaged head but eyes blazing with defiance. His flight suit was torn, yet his military bearing remained unshaken despite his capture. "Lieutenant Yamamoto," Ishida barked in Japanese, "you will extract every technical detail from this aircraft. The pilot refuses to cooperate. Make the machine reveal what he won't." Teishi bowed in deference. "Yes, Major." As Ishida departed, the American pilot spoke, his Japanese surprisingly clear. "You're wasting your time. That plane is already obsolete. We're building better ones every month." Teishi spun around, taken aback by the fluent Japanese from American lips. "You speak our language." The pilot's expression held no malice, only profound wariness. "Missionary parents. Grew up in Kyoto. I'm Captain James Morrison. And that Thunderbolt, it's a 1943 model. We're flying D models now, more power, more armor, more everything." "Lies," Kenji hissed. "American propaganda, is it?" Morrison's gaze settled on Teishi. "You're an engineer. Look at that plane. Honestly, could Japan build it?" Teishi felt the profound weight of that question. As an engineer, he had devoured American technical journals before the war, understood their industrial might, their relentless culture of innovation. He'd cautioned his superiors in 1941 that attacking America was strategic suicide. His warnings had been ignored. "Take the pilot to holding," Teishi instructed the guards. "We'll commence immediate disassembly." As Morrison was led away, his voice carried back, "Check the panel rivets. Check the fuel system redundancy. Check how many rounds that thing carries. Then ask yourself how you're supposed to win against a country that builds these as standard production fighters." The hangar doors clanged shut. Teishi stood alone with Kenji and the colossal American aircraft, a tremor of fear, cold and real, coursing through him for the first time since Pearl Harbor. Morrison was right, and Teishi knew it to his bones. The disassembly commenced at dawn. Teishi gathered his elite team. 6 veteran technicians who had maintained Zeros and engineered modifications for the Navy's fighter program. They approached the Thunderbolt not as mechanics, but as archaeologists unearthing an artifact from an alien, far more advanced civilization. "Begin with external inspection," Teishi commanded. "Panel construction, surface finish, material quality. Document everything." For 3 grueling hours, they measured, photographed, and scribbled notes. Their findings were systematically demoralizing. The aluminum alloy was unequivocally superior, stronger, lighter, and more corrosion-resistant than any alloy Japan could produce. The riveting, thousands of fasteners, was machine, precise, tolerances measured in mere hundredths of millimeters. The surface finish, so impossibly smooth, promised significantly reduced drag compared to Japan's meticulously hand-finished aircraft. This wasn't handcrafted, Kenji murmured, running his palm over the fuselage. This came from an assembly line. Mass production with quality surpassing our bespoke fighters. Tishi nodded grimly. He'd read about American manufacturing marvels. Ford's assembly lines applied to aircraft, the Willow Run factory in Michigan churning out B-24 bombers at 1 per hour, Republic Aviation building P-47s faster than Japan could train pilots for zeros. Open the engine cowling, Tishi ordered. Let's see what truly powers this monster. The R-2800 radial engine revealed itself in all its intimidating complexity, 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, each component machined to specifications that would make Japanese engine builders weep. The supercharger alone weighed more than an entire Zero engine, 2,000 horsepower, Tishi murmured, deciphering the engine plate. Our Seikei engine produces barely 1,000, but we're faster, Kenji protested. More maneuverable. The Zero can outfight any American plane. Can it? Tishi gestured to the armor plating behind the pilot's seat, thick steel capable of deflecting rifle caliber rounds with ease. The Zero has no armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks. One burst of gunfire and it becomes a burning pyre. This thunderbolt, its pilot walks away from damage that would instantly kill a Zero pilot. Kenji looked stricken. You're saying we've been sacrificing our pilots unnecessarily. I'm saying we designed fighters based on samurai philosophy, speed and agility over protection. Americans designed fighters to keep their pilots alive. Different philosophies, different outcomes. They moved on to the armament. 8 50 caliber machine guns, 4 in each wing. Tishi quickly calculated a combined rate of fire exceeding 6,000 rounds per minute. The ammunition boxes housed 425 rounds per gun, totaling over 400 rounds. Impossible, Kenji breathed. How do they carry so much ammunition? Because the plane is designed around overwhelming firepower and keeping the pilot alive. Tishi explained. R-Zero carries 2 20 Nemrod cannons with 60 rounds each and 2 7.92 guns. This Thunderbolt can fire continuously for 30 seconds. A Zero runs out in 3. The implications were staggering. American pilots could make mistakes, miss their initial burst, and still have ammunition for multiple engagements. Japanese pilots had to be perfect, a brief combat run and they were empty. Major Ishida returned that afternoon, demanding progress reports. Tishi presented his findings clinically, devoid of emotion, allowing the stark facts to speak for themselves. This aircraft represents industrial capacity we cannot match, Tishi concluded. Superior materials, superior manufacturing, superior design philosophy. We are fighting an enemy who outproduces us 10 to 1 in aircraft quality and 50 to 1 in quantity. Ishida's face darkened. You sound defeatist, Lieutenant. I sound realistic, Major. This is one fighter from one squadron. America has thousands of them. We've lost most of our experienced pilots. Our factories can barely produce replacement aircraft. The mathematics of this war are unsustainable. The emperor's will cannot overcome physics. Tishi interjected, his voice harder than he'd intended. Or industrial capacity or resource disparities. We are losing this war, Major. This aircraft proves it. The hangar fell silent, the tension palpable. Speaking such truths aloud was perilous, defeatism was punishable by death. But Tishi was utterly exhausted from the pretense, from maintaining the fiction that Japan could somehow prevail against America's overwhelming material superiority. Ishida's hand instinctively moved to his sword hilt. Then slowly, deliberately, it dropped away. Continue your analysis, the Major said quietly. And Lieutenant, keep your conclusions technical. The truth is dangerous for morale. After Ishida left, Kenji approached nervously. That was reckless. He could have killed you. Then he would have killed the only engineer here capable of understanding what we're looking at. Tishi retorted. The truth is, Kenji, I don't care anymore. I'm tired of lying. Tired of pretending we're winning when every technical indicator screams annihilation. So what do we do? Kenji asked. We've finished the analysis. We document everything. And when this war ends, because it will end, and we will lose, we'll have data showing exactly why we lost. Maybe that prevents the next generation from making the same mistakes. Day 3 of the analysis focused on systems integration. How the Thunderbolt's myriad components seamlessly worked together. What Tichy discovered was even more demoralizing than the raw specifications. The hydraulic system operated at pressures Japan's pumps couldn't achieve. The electrical system used standardized components that could be swapped in minutes. The radio was crystal clear, with a range that dwarfed anything in Japanese aircraft. The oxygen system for high-altitude flight was remarkably reliable, where Japanese versions frequently failed. But the fuel system unveiled the most damning evidence of American technical superiority: self-sealing tanks. Tichy explained to his team, pointing to the rubber liner designed to automatically seal bullet holes. One punctured, the rubber swells and closes the hole. The pilot can take hits and keep flying. R0s, one tracer round in the fuel tank, and the whole aircraft becomes a fireball. Why don't we have this technology? Asked Lieutenant Sarto, a younger engineer. ww2. Tichy said bitterly. I proposed it in 1940. The Navy rejected it because the added weight would reduce range and maneuverability. They chose to sacrifice pilot protection for performance. And the Americans chose differently. The Americans, Tichy said, value their pilots' lives enough to accept slightly reduced performance for vastly improved survival rates. We call our pilots gods. They call theirs valuable assets to protect. Which philosophy do you think produces more veteran pilots? The question hung in the air, unanswerable and damning. Captain Morrison was brought to the hangar that afternoon. Major Ishida had authorized limited interaction, hoping the American might reveal technical details in casual conversation. Instead, Morrison proved an engineer's nightmare. Knowledgeable, willing to talk, and absolutely devastating in his honesty. You're wondering about the redundant systems, Morrison said, watching them examine the fuel pumps. We design for battle damage. Every critical system has a backup. You hit our fuel pump, the backup kicks in. You damage our hydraulics, we've got manual reversion. You take out our radio, we've got another one. Wasteful, Kenji muttered. Heavy, inefficient, effective, Morrison corrected. I've been shot up 3 times, taken damage that would have downed your fighters. Flew home every time because the plane kept working even when damaged. He paused. How many of your pilots get a second chance after taking damage? Silence. Everyone in the hangar knew the answer: very few. Japanese fighters were fragile by design, optimized for performance over survival. It was elegant engineering built on the assumption that pilots were expendable. Show me your maintenance requirements, Tichy requested. Hours of work per flight hour. Morrison smiled slightly. 5 maintenance hours per flight hour. Everything's designed for easy access. Panels come off with a few fasteners. Engines swap out in a day. We've got ground crews back in the States who can completely rebuild a Thunderbolt in 72 hours. That's impossible. That's American manufacturing philosophy. Build it strong, build it simple, build it repairable. Your Zero is a masterpiece of lightweight engineering. This Thunderbolt is a masterpiece of practical war fighting. Morrison's expression turned serious. You want to know the real difference? We design aircraft for the pilots we have. You design them for the pilots you wish you had. Tichy absorbed this, the truth settling like lead in his stomach. The Zero demanded exceptional pilots to maximize its potential, men who could exploit its agility while compensating for its lack of protection. The Thunderbolt was designed so average pilots could be effective, could survive mistakes, could learn from combat experience. One philosophy produced individual brilliance. The other produced sustainable air superiority. Your country is going to lose this war, Morrison said quietly. You know that, right? You're smart enough to see it in this aircraft, to understand what it represents. Winning or losing is not for engineers to decide, Tichy replied carefully. No, but surviving is. Morrison leaned closer, his voice dropping. When this war ends, people like you, engineers, technicians, people who understand how things actually work, you're the ones who will rebuild. Don't get yourself killed defending a lost cause. Japan's going to need people who can admit mistakes and build something better. Before Tichy could respond, Major Ishida entered with 2 stern-faced Kempi-tai officers, military police. Their presence instantly made everyone in the hangar tense. Lieutenant Yamamoto, one Kempitai officer, said coldly, "We've received reports of defeatist statements, of spreading lies about American superiority, of undermining fighting spirit among your subordinates." Tishi's blood ran cold. Someone had informed on him. His technical honesty was interpreted as treason. "I have spoken only facts," Tishi said carefully. "Technical assessments based on evidence. Facts can be treasonous when they discourage others." The officer stepped closer. "You will report to headquarters for questioning. Your analysis of the American aircraft will be reviewed for appropriate patriotic framing." As guards moved to escort him away, Morrison spoke up. "He's telling you the truth. Shooting the messenger won't change reality. Silence, prisoner." "Why?" Morrison's voice carried across the hangar. "You're going to execute him for being honest about losing a war you've already lost. That's not honor. That's cowardice." The Kempitai officer's hand moved to his sword. Tishi stepped forward quickly. "The American doesn't understand our culture," he said. "I will cooperate with questioning fully. There's no need for violence." But as Tishi was led from the hangar, he caught Kenji's eye and saw the fear there. Fear of a system that punished truth, that preferred comforting lies to uncomfortable reality, that would rather execute engineers than admit technical inferiority. Japan was losing the war. The Thunderbolt proved it. But they'd shoot Tishi for saying so. That, perhaps, was the most damning evidence of all. The interrogation room was bare concrete, starkly illuminated by a harsh bulb. Two Kempitai officers relentlessly questioned Tishi for 6 hours, demanding he recant his assessments, admit his statements were exaggerated, swear loyalty to the Emperor's divine victory. Tishi refused, not out of defiance, but out of an utter exhaustion with lies. "The P-47 Thunderbolt represents industrial capacity Japan cannot match," he repeated for the dozenth time. "This is engineering fact, not political opinion. If you want different conclusions, you need different evidence. Your subordinates report you said we are losing the war. We are losing the war. Anyone with access to production figures knows this. We're losing pilots faster than we can train replacements. We're losing aircraft faster than factories can build them. The Americans gain strength while we weaken. These are observable facts. And yet you continued serving the Emperor." "I serve Japan." Tishi corrected quietly. "The Emperor represents Japan. But Japan is more than any one man. Japan is the people, the culture, the future. Serving Japan means telling the truth so we can make informed decisions, not maintaining comforting fictions until we're completely destroyed." The interrogation stretched into the night. Tishi answered every question honestly, knowing each truth dug his grave deeper, but he was past caring. The war was lost. Japan would be occupied. Men like him, technical specialists who'd warned against the war, would be vindicated too late to matter. Around midnight, Major Ishida entered the interrogation room. He dismissed the Kempitai officers with curt authority. "You're trying to get yourself killed," Ishida said once they were alone. "I'm trying to stop living in fantasy." Tishi's voice was hoarse from talking. "Major, I've analyzed that American aircraft for 3 days. Every measurement, every component, every system confirms the same conclusion. We are fighting an industrial superpower with workshop-level production. It's not sustainable. It never was. Even if true, saying so publicly undermines morale. Morale based on lies is worthless. Those pilots you're sending up in zeros, they deserve to know they're flying death traps against aircraft designed to keep pilots alive. They deserve accurate information about their chances." Ishida sat heavily in the chair across from Tishi. For a long moment he said nothing. "I fought in China," he began, his voice low. "I've seen what our forces did there. The brutality, the casual cruelty, the systematic dehumanization of Chinese people. I told myself it was necessary, that it would forge a greater East Asia prosperity sphere. And now I've seen the American aircraft, the American equipment, the American prisoners who treat our interrogators with more dignity than we treat our own subordinates. And I wonder if we've been the villains all along." Ishida looked up, cracks showing in his military bearing. "But I can't say that. Can't even think it officially. Men who admit such doubts disappear. So you brought me here to confirm you're not alone in understanding the truth. I brought you here because the Kempitai wants to execute you tomorrow. Court-martial for defeatism. Sentence carried out immediately. Ishida pulled papers from his jacket. But there's an alternative. A transport leaves for mainland Japan in 3 hours. Technical specialists being evacuated before the Americans retake the Philippines. I can get you on that transport. Why would you help me? Because Japan will need engineers like you when this war ends. Men who understand American methods, who can analyze their technology, who can help rebuild. Ishida slid the papers across the table. And because you're right about everything, but being right doesn't matter if you're dead. Tishi stared at the evacuation orders. Escape, survival, the chance to use his knowledge in peacetime instead of dying for wartime honesty. What about my team? Kenji, Sardo, the others. Already on the transport manifest, I'm evacuating everyone who worked on the Thunderbolt analysis. The Americans will be here in weeks. When they arrive, I don't want my best engineers in a prison camp or executed for knowing too much. And you? Ishida's smile was bitter. I'm a major. I stay with my command. I die defending an air base we can't hold. Buying time for civilians to evacuate, that's my duty. That's suicide. That's war. The honorable samurai death you avoided by being too honest. Ishida stood, handing Tishi the papers. Go. Take your knowledge. Survive the war. Help rebuild Japan into something that doesn't feed its children to machines. Make my death mean something. 2 hours later, Tishi stood on the tarmac, watching supplies being loaded onto a transport aircraft. His team surrounded him: Kenji, Sardo, 4 others, all men who'd seen the Thunderbolt and understood the implications. We're running away, Kenji said quietly. Abandoning our posts. We're surviving, Tishi corrected. So we can help rebuild. That's not cowardice. That's pragmatism. Captain Morrison was being loaded onto the same transport. Prisoners were being evacuated too, heading for mainland Japan's PUD camps. As he passed, Morrison caught Tishi's eye. You're the engineer, right? The honest one. Tishi nodded. Good, Morrison said. Japan's going to need people like you. People who can admit when something's broken and figure out how to fix it. He paused at the aircraft steps. That Thunderbolt, it's not our best plane. It's not even our newest. It's just a standard production fighter from a country that builds them faster than you can shoot them down. Remember that when you're rebuilding. Remember what you learned. The transport lifted off at dawn, engines straining against the tropical heat. Tishi watched Clark Air Base recede below, knowing he'd probably never see it again, knowing Major Ishida would die defending it in weeks or months. And in the cargo hold, secured under tarps, was the disassembled P-47 Thunderbolt, every component cataloged, every measurement documented, every system analyzed. Evidence of American industrial might that would inform Japan's post-war reconstruction. They'd lost the war. The Thunderbolt proved it. But Tishi and his team would survive to learn from that loss, to understand what Japan did wrong, to build something better from the rubble. Sometimes survival was victory enough. December 1944, Nagoya, Japan. The technical briefing room held 30 of Japan's top aviation engineers, all summoned to hear Tishi's presentation on the captured Thunderbolt. He stood before a blackboard crammed with specifications, measurements, calculations that collectively painted a devastating picture of industrial superiority. The engine alone outweighs our entire Zero. Tishi began, knowing every word would further demoralize his audience. 2,000 horsepower from 18 cylinders, machined to tolerances our factories cannot achieve even in peacetime. The Americans build these engines on assembly lines, producing more in a month than we produce in a year. Surely there are weaknesses, interrupted Commander Horikoshi, designer of the Zero. Excessive weight must compromise agility. It does. The Thunderbolt cannot dogfight like a Zero. It doesn't need to. Tishi gestured to the armor specifications on the board. American pilots use altitude advantage and diving attacks. They hit us once with overwhelming firepower, then climb away faster than we can follow. Our agility is irrelevant if we can't catch them. Then we design faster interceptors. Another engineer suggested. With what materials, what factories, what fuel? Tishi's voice hardened. While we debate theoretical improvements, America produces 50 fighters for every one we build. They lose pilots and replace them within weeks. We lose pilots and our veteran experience disappears forever because we sacrifice protection for performance. The room erupted in angry protests. Tishi let them shout, let them deny, let them cling to comfortable illusions. Finally, Commander Horikoshi raised his hand for silence. Lieutenant Yamamoto, are you saying the Zero's design philosophy was flawed from the beginning? I'm saying, Tishi chose his words carefully, that we optimized for different priorities. We valued range and maneuverability. Americans valued pilot survival and sustained combat effectiveness. Both are valid engineering choices, but only one philosophy wins extended wars of attrition. So we'll lost in December 1941 when we attacked a nation that outproduces us 50-1 in every category. I tried to warn people before the war. No one listened. Now I'm warning you again, unless we fundamentally change our approach to aviation design, to pilot training, to industrial production, we will lose every pilot we have left defending a homeland we cannot protect. This is defeatism, someone shouted. This is mathematics, Tishi replied. And mathematics doesn't care about fighting spirit or divine wind or samurai honor. The Americans are winning because they understand industrial warfare better than we do. Until we accept that truth, we'll keep sacrificing men in aircraft designed for a war we cannot win. Commander Horikoshi stood slowly. I designed the Zero. I made those choices. Range over armor, agility over protection. I believed I was giving our pilots the best possible weapon. Now you're telling me I sentenced them to death. You designed a magnificent aircraft for the war we thought we'd fight short, decisive campaigns against nearby targets. The Americans designed for the war whereas actually fighting extended attrition across vast distances. Neither of us was wrong, but only one philosophy survives contact with reality. Horikoshi approached the blackboard, studying the Thunderbolt specifications with an engineer's eye. If we could replicate this construction quality, these tolerances, this system's integration, could we match American production? No, Tishi said bluntly. We'll lack the machine tools, the electrical grid capacity, the trained workforce, the raw materials, and most critically, the time. Even if we started today with unlimited resources, it would take 5 years to build the industrial base necessary for this level of production. The war will be over in months. Then what do? We document everything. We preserve this knowledge, and when the war ends, when occupation comes, we use what we learn to rebuild Japan's industrial capacity correctly. Not for war, but for peace. Not for empire, but for prosperity. Tishi gestured to his team. We've disassembled American excellence. When the time comes, we'll reassemble Japanese potential. The briefing ended in uncomfortable silence. Half the engineers left angry, unwilling to accept that their life's work had been built on flawed assumptions. The other half stayed, asking questions, taking notes, beginning the painful process of understanding that being brilliant engineers hadn't been enough when facing superior industrial systems. That night, Kenji found Tishi alone in the workshop, still calculating, still measuring, still trying to quantify the unquantifiable gulf between Japanese craftsmanship and American mass production. You made them angry today, Kenji said quietly. I told them the truth. Truth is often angry-making. Commander Horikoshi looked devastated. You essentially told him his masterpiece killed our pilots. His masterpiece did exactly what he designed it to do. Tishi corrected. It wasn't his fault that our military strategy was fundamentally flawed, that our logistics were inadequate, that our industrial base was insufficient. He did his job brilliantly. The system failed him, not the other way around. Will they arrest you again for defeatism? Tishi shrugged. Probably, but I'm past caring. Japan needs to hear these truths, even if individuals get punished for speaking them. Otherwise, we'll lose this war without understanding why, and we'll make the same mistakes again. You sound like you're preparing for defeat. I'm preparing for survival. There's a difference. March 1945. Allied bombers annihilated Nagoya's aircraft factories in a single night of incendiary raids. Tishi stood in the rubble the next morning, watching Japan's industrial capacity literally go up in smoke. Around him, engineers wept or stood in shocked silence. Years of work, irreplaceable machine tools, precious materials, all reduced to ash. "We can rebuild," someone said weakly. "With what?" Tichy gestured to the devastation. "The Americans just demonstrated another lesson from the Thunderbolt. They have so much industrial capacity they can afford to destroy ours. They fly bombers that cost 100,000 each, risk crews of 10 men, just to deny us factories. That's the kind of war we're fighting. One where the enemy treats massive bombers as acceptable losses if it achieves strategic objectives." Kenji pulled him aside, away from other survivors. "There are rumors about a new weapon. Something that will change the war instantly. There is no weapon that changes the fundamental equations of industrial warfare." Tichy said tiredly, "We're losing because we can't replace losses fast enough, can't train pilots adequately, can't protect our cities. No single weapon fixes systemic failures." But rumors persisted. Secret projects, wonder weapons, last-ditch efforts to achieve victory through technological breakthrough, rather than industrial sustainability. Tichy heard whispers about suicide attacks, pilots deliberately crashing into American ships because they couldn't shoot them down conventionally, the logical conclusion of sacrificing protection for performance. When performance wasn't enough, sacrifice the pilot entirely. August 1945 brought news that froze Tichy's blood: atomic bombs. Hiroshima erased in a single flash. Nagasaki following days later. The Emperor's radio broadcast announcing surrender. The war was over. Japan had lost. Everything Tichy had warned about had come true. He stood in the ruins of Nagoya's engineering district, Captain Morrison's words echoing in his memory. "People like you, engineers who understand how things actually work, you're the ones who will rebuild." American occupation forces arrived in September. Military engineers assessed Japan's industrial damage, cataloged surviving machinery, interviewed technical specialists. When they reached Tichy, he was surprised to find Captain Morrison among the occupation assessment team. "You survived," Morrison said, shaking his hand like they were colleagues rather than former enemies. "And you made it home." "I survived." Tichy agreed. "Many didn't. I read your technical analysis of the Thunderbolt. It was thorough, honest, and damning. Your superiors must have hated it. They tried to execute me for it. A sympathetic major helped me escape." Tichy gestured to the ruined factories. "Turned out to be pointless. We couldn't build improved fighters, even with perfect understanding of American technology. We lacked the industrial base, which is exactly what your analysis concluded." Morrison pulled out papers. "The Occupation Authority is establishing programs to rebuild Japanese industry. We need technical advisors, people who understand both Japanese manufacturing traditions and American industrial methods. People who can bridge cultures and build something better. You're offering me a job working for the occupation. I'm offering you a chance to rebuild Japan the right way, using lessons learned from that Thunderbolt, from this war, from the mistakes both sides made. Not for military purposes but for economic development. Toyota, Mitsubishi, Honda. These companies will need engineers who understand modern production methods." Tichy looked at the ruins surrounding them, at the ash of factories that would never rebuild for war. What about honor? Japanese engineers working for American occupation. What about survival? What about making sure Japan never arms children and sends them to die again? What about using your knowledge to build prosperity instead of weapons? Morrison's expression turned serious. "You told the truth when truth was dangerous. Keep doing that. Keep being the engineer who values reality over ideology. Japan needs that. And if I refuse, then you rebuild on your own, slower, harder, probably less effectively. But you rebuild anyway, because that's what engineers do. We look at broken systems and figure out how to fix them." Tichy thought about the Thunderbolt, about everything he'd learned from dismantling it, not just technical specifications, but philosophical approaches valuing survival over victory, sustainability over sacrifice, systemic thinking over individual heroism. "I'll do it," he said, "one condition." "What's that?" "We preserve the Thunderbolt analysis. Every measurement, every observation, every lesson learned, not as military intelligence, but as an industrial case study, So Japanese engineers understand what we did wrong and what America did right, so the next generation learns from our mistakes. Morrison smiled. Deal. And Lieutenant Yamamoto welcomed to the reconstruction. It's going to be harder than the war, but the results will last longer. Over the next decades, Taishi and his team worked with American advisors to rebuild Japan's industrial capacity. They applied lessons learned from that captured P478 precision manufacturing, quality control, systems integration, production efficiency. The companies they helped: Toyota's production system, Sony's electronics, Honda's engines, would eventually surpass American competitors, using principles learned from American wartime excellence. The Zero had been a masterpiece of lightweight engineering. The Thunderbolt had been a masterpiece of industrial warfare. Post-war Japan synthesized both philosophies, Japanese craftsmanship married to American production methods, creating an economic miracle from military disaster. And in a small museum in Nagoya, preserved under glass, sat the technical drawings from Taishi's Thunderbolt analysis. Documentation of the moment Japanese engineers confronted American industrial might and understood they'd been fighting a war they could never win. Future engineers studied those drawings not as military documents, but as business school case studies. The Thunderbolt that shocked them into recognition became the template for economic revival. Proof that honest assessment of failure was the first step toward future success. Captain Morrison had been right. Japan needed people who understood how things actually worked, who valued truth over ideology, who could admit mistakes and build something better. The war was over. The reconstruction had begun, and the lessons learned from one captured fighter would shape an entire nation's industrial renaissance. Thank you for joining us on this technical journey through World War II. If these engineering stories fascinate you, please subscribe to our channel for more hidden histories about the machines, the designers, and the impossible choices that shaped the war. Share this video with anyone who appreciates the technical side of history. Leave a comment about what surprised you most. And remember, sometimes the most important battles are fought with slide rules and honesty, not with weapons and propaganda. The past has lessons for today, if we're brave enough to learn.